Thank you to the BFI for agreeing to talk to our Writers Guild members today to introduce themselves, their new funding structure, and to offer some guidance and advice on how best writers should navigate their submission and application process in conjunction with the producers whose name is actually on the application form. I hope this is a very useful session. We will try to get to questions from participants if we have time during the hour. We have taken some in advance as well. I would like to welcome Mia Bays as, gosh, I hope I get this right, Director of the Filmmaking Fund. Hello, Mia. Could I welcome you and possibly ask you to introduce yourself and your team with as much relevant biography as you think is important to kick us off?
Of course, and thank you, Tom and Kate. And it's really great to be here, and I'm really glad we made this happen, and we'll definitely would like to do this more regularly. So my name's Mia Bays, and I have been in this post for 18 months. I'm on a midway through my service, and what we'll walk you through today is a very specific writer focused, for obvious reasons, insight into our strategy and all of the changes to the team and process and funding structure. So before, I've worked across the whole spectrum of the industry and celebrated 30 years in film a couple of years ago. So I've worked across distribution and marketing and international sales, strategy, became a producer, ran Microwave, the first iteration of Film London's Microwave, so I made films like Shifty and Lilting. And then for the last 5 years was a cultural activist, running Bird's Eye View and setting up Reclaim the Frame, which was a mission to bring ever greater audiences to films by women. I've done a lot of work in terms of workshops and career development and talent development, and I know quite a lot of people are by face or by name. Not everyone's on camera, but it's lovely to see those who are. So I'll hand to Louise to introduce herself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Louise Ortega. I'm the one of the senior production and development execs at the BFI Filmmaking Fund. I also, like Mia, I've been here about a year. I have worked in lots of different areas of film. I've worked in acquisition. I started out being an agent's assistant, which was quite a gossipy, fun time. I have worked sort of primarily in development. So I was at BBC Film. I was head of development at Vertigo Films. I've worked in television for Slim Film and TV. I script edited on a series of The Split. And I also ran development at Seesaw before joining the team here. So that's me. Hand you over to Amma.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Ampadu, and I'm the second senior production and development executive at the BFI Filmmaking Fund. I'm relatively new to the role. I joined in January, so it's roughly 3 months that I've been doing this role. Prior to joining the BFI, I was an independent producer working in the UK, but also internationally. So I have experience making film in Africa quite significantly, also in France. And yes, so as somebody who has run a production company, I guess I've also been involved in developing the work of a medley of writers and directors. Well, thank you.
And last but not least, James.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is James Collins. I am the development coordinator. So I work across the whole slate of development from application over to sort of our live deliveries and sort of help manage our slate with the team. Previous to this, I was at Warner. And then previous to that, I worked in diversity inclusion within the TV industry through a company called Creative Diversity Network. So lots of different creative industries.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to kick off. We have a presentation, and so we're going to present as swiftly as possible, so we have time then for committee member questions, and then I think a more open Q&A, as Tom said. So let's kick off with our reel, James, and then we'll go through our deck. Wonderful. Okay, let's get moving with our next slide. So I'm sure everyone is aware of this, but just some top line, that we are a charity and we're governed by a Royal Charter. We're the lead body for film and the moving image in the UK and distributor of national lottery funds. And next slide, please. Screen Culture is the name of the new 10-year strategy that we just launched. And so this is an overview of the mission, which is creating the conditions in which the screen culture and the UK screen industries can thrive and make its mark, not just at home, but across the world too. So there is an enormous amount of work in the archive, as I'm sure you're aware. That's a big focus, but also what our role and what we're going to talk about is new work and how we connect that work to the widest possible range of UK and international audiences, both at home and in cinemas and anywhere you can find it on whatever screen you may use. Using our knowledge to educate and deepen public appreciation and impact, supporting creativity and the industrial process, and working closely with government and industry. Next slide. So we've made sure that on each of these slides, we've got an illustration of a recent film that is, I think all of them are separate writers and directors, just to illustrate that point, how important it is to support writers and directors and who are not necessarily the same person. So again, Screen Culture emphasized how intrinsic to life stories are, and film, TV and the moving image bring those to life, and it's about how we connect, and it facilitates understanding and empathy both domestically and internationally. And we share the stories of yesterday, search for the stories of today, and shape the stories of tomorrow. And all our purpose is built upon storytelling, choice, access, opportunity, discovery, and connection. Next slide, please. So this is a top line of how all of our national lottery money gets spent. So not every piece of sterling that comes into the UK, into the fund is rather into the BFI is actually lottery. But it's a significant part, and actually our fund is the largest provider of lottery funding. Everything we award is lottery, so lottery comes with its own particular predilections. So the overall for the next 3 years, the funding pot is £136 million. That is a cut, so that's 20% less than the previous strategy period. So as you can see, the lion's share goes to filmmaking, and we'll break that down shortly, and education and skills, audiences, screen heritage, innovation and industry services, and international. Next slide. And then that breaks down our £54 million over the next 3 years. We'll go into the specific breakdown. Rye Lane we're incredibly proud of that film that's just now enjoying its 6th week in cinemas in the UK, which is unbelievably unusual for releases nowadays. As I'm sure we all know, whether you pay avid attention or not, films tend to come and go in cinemas. There's quite a high churn, and not many sit there for a long time, very, very much generated by word of mouth. If you have what we call a long tail, it's because word of mouth is so strong and is propelling the hold of that film in cinemas. And so Rye Lane, written by Nathan Byron and Tom Millier and directed by Rain Allen Miller, is certainly one of those. So yeah, I think we're actually on our 7th week, and which I'm incredibly proud of. So that's one of the kind of biggest indie hits of the year so far, out of the UK. I think it's now on £1.3 million. Next slide, please, James. So the way that breaks down, our 54 million breaks into production being the lion's share and the most expensive of all of the work that we do, and that's across features. And then we have a separate documentary delegation that is also, of course, relevant to writers, because that's much more traditional. It's been traditionally more director focused, but actually we've been seeing in the last few years, and I'm sure you've talked about this in other sessions, an introduction of writing credits and a writing capacity. So our documentary delegation, which is short form, which includes immersive and then feature development and production, is delegated to the Doc Society again for the next 3 years, and their fund will be open soon for those here who are interested in that. Network is £7.8 million across the next 3 years, and they have not had a drop. And so we'll go into a bit more detail about some of the changes to Network shortly. Then there's a new fund, Creative Challenge Fund, which is specifically for labs and project and career development programs. So that is specifically for, it's not training, it's for creative practice and project development, and I'll go into that a bit more later. And then there are some funds yet to be announced, which is how our support for short form animation and for immersive will play out later this year. We'll announce. So we haven't opened all of our funds, but pretty much everything else is open now. Next slide, please. So this is how it breaks down. So development is now chopped up into 2, sliced into halves. So, well, actually not entirely halves in financially. So the lion's share still goes to development, project development, and then the other is the new fund, which is Creative Challenge Fund, which I'll explain a bit more shortly. And then production is now chopped into 2, so discovery and impact. Discovery, as we'll elaborate on, is for debuts, and impact is for more established high budget work. And then we have our new high budget short scheme, which we'll speak to shortly, and also, as I said, an ongoing commitment to immersive and short form animation. And next slide, please. So everything we do is centered around these fund priorities that drive all of our decisions. So at the top, a very strong commitment to equity, diversity and inclusion, and how we diversify the offering for audiences at home and internationally. Impact and audience, not necessarily just measured commercially via box office, but obviously how wide a film may be seen, or what its cultural impact may be, or equally its international impact. And there's often a wide range. There's lots of measures of success, and it certainly should not just be the commercial. We tend actually to really privilege the other measures of success being cultural. So talent progression and development, creative risk taking, the UK wide of it, and how important it is that we are centering stories that talk to every experience across the UK, from the past, present and future, and then environmental sustainability and a strong commitment to that across the process. Next slide. So these are just some of the recent films that I just wanted to lift up. Some of those have been out, like Brian and Charles. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, written adapted by Rachel Joyce from her own novel of the same name. Comes out actually on Friday, and that is getting a 650 screen release, so highly recommend that. Starring national treasure Jim Broadbent. Hopefully you will have seen the campaign. E1 are going for a massive release. 650 screen is what we would call saturation, so very happy to see that. And that's directed by Hetty MacDonald. Rye Lane we already spoke to. Then we have Ken Loach and Paul Laverty's The Old Oak. That will be their last collaboration, and that is in competition in Cannes. We have The End We Start From, Mahalia Bello, and written by Alice Birch, which is an adaptation of the novel of the same name. And just got a question there about adaptations. No, that's definitely, we definitely do adaptations. And no, there is no rule between, so the Alice Birch that I'm just lifting up, The End We Start From, which is in post, which stars Jodie Comer. You can see that image of her there in the middle. That is an adaptation of a novel by Alice Birch. So the next slide, please. And then we'll walk you through how the development breaks down, which is £7.2 million over the next 3 years. Next slide. So project funding for feature films, live action and animation. So very much emphasizing it's open now. It's a rolling window. There will just be one closure where we reset in August. We've updated the priorities and guidelines, and James will be posting some of the resources and links to those in the chat. And early stage producer overheads are increased, just recognizing the challenges there. So there's just more money, slightly more money if you're early stage 1 or 2 credits for the producer versus if you're 3+ features. We have not increased that. And then new inclusion targets, new benchmarks to identify where support is over and underrepresented. So we'll keep constant track on that. And I don't know if my colleagues want to say anything else about any emphasis on any of our changes.
No, I think that's covered. Yeah, that covers it.
Great. Okay, let's keep going. So just thought it was useful to just center how many applications we get on average. So 768 feature applications. So that's specifically animation or live action, not documentary, over the last 3 years. And 259 of those were granted. So that's on average 33% of the applicants get supported. And the yeah, so that's, I don't think we have anything else to say on that. So yeah, 33% we fund as much as we can, and James has just dropped in the chat the guidelines. Next slide, please. So yeah, 259 awards over the last 3 years, and we thought it was useful to break down the number awarded to projects that were writer director versus separate writers and directors. So it's a 156 versus 103, and we are mindful of this, and we actually do look we do consider that in our applications, in our assessments. And I don't know if Louise, you want to add anything to that, or Amma?
Just as you say, is something that's definitely noted whenever we're looking at the applications, whether it is coming from a writer director or whether it is separate teams, and kind of how each of the people in those teams sort of, and the project itself speaks to our priorities. Those are kind of the main, that's the kickoff of all those conversations.
Yes. Next slide, please. So Creator Challenge Fund. So this is the new one. So this is, we're really excited about this because this post-Brexit, and also because of the pandemic, a lot of labs and project development programs have just been put on ice or just stopped, or UK access to them ended because of funding, access to funding. So we wanted to do something to enliven that. It's something I think we all as a team feel very strongly that they're actually really positive. It often, there's an incredibly important nurturing atmosphere that you can get from peers, from mentors, And it's incredibly healthy, actually, for us to have other spaces in which we can recommend people to work, both people that are supported by the development fund or not. And it's important that there's a balance. And so this will be open to production companies and other film organizations who have some kind of track record in developing projects and running or running labs and development programs. So it's specifically for writers, directors and producers to advance creative practice and approach. And again, the funding priorities and targets will be then passed on to whoever we're awarding the money to. And the point is, as I said, to decentralize from us and from other development funding, the approach to project development and creative practice, so that it's not just all held within our rather large slate and rather stretched team. That we thought it was much healthier to diversify and make sure that wherever you are in the UK, you have access to something that speaks to you, to your project, and perhaps to where you are in your career. And it's also an important point because we get asked a lot about how to find producers, and the point of these labs and these programs is that they will provide more space to do that and to nurture those relationships, to network, etc. Next slide, please. And that's open later this year. So we're just starting to write the guidelines, and then we're going to open that as soon as we can. And so the point being that it will be open to people who are to writers who don't necessarily have a producer. We'll make sure that there is a spread. So production breaks down as 29.4 million over the next 3 years, and that splits into 2 different funds. And I'll leave to my colleagues, Amma, to Louise, sorry, your Discovery, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, I was going to speak to this one, thank you. So yeah, Discovery is specifically for debut directors, their debut features that are budgeted at 3.5 million or below. And we're running it in 3 rounds. So we just closed a round, which is sort of quite date specific. That was for things that are hoping to be shooting sort of this summer / kind of beginning of a Q4. We're sort of splitting it out from a larger fund to try and represent the fact that some directors have, while they may be technically a feature debut, they might have a sort of large wealth of television experience and maybe coming in at a higher budget. And so it's sort of trying to make sure the smaller films are being compared sort of like for like in terms of budget. When we're talking about these, we're always, as I said, always assessing according to our priorities. So it's always about supporting progressing filmmakers, producers, writers from underrepresented groups, projects that make a cultural impact, projects which have a risk factor, meaning they wouldn't have the same access and opportunity to commercial money, projects which represent the UK wide rather than only London and South East, which, is kind of something that kind of, can be a challenge, but we sort of work very closely with Network in trying to find talent in different areas as well. Creative risk-taking projects and projects which are designed in an environmentally sustainable way. Yes, as I said, those priorities are always discussed when we're coming to the wider conversation about a project. Once an award is made in this fund, our team will be on hand throughout the process to support these filmmakers making their debut across the script work through development, budget, financing, and right through production and post. And I'll hand over to Amma for the next part of the fund.
Hi, everyone. So the Impact Fund is for projects for more experienced writer-directors whose project will struggle to find financing in the commercial sector in full or in part. So that's from second feature and onwards. And we have listened and we have acknowledged that just because somebody has made the first feature doesn't mean that things do not remain complex, particularly in this current climax. So it will be for projects which are more than 3.5 million. However, there is some flexibility for example, first-time filmmakers who have established a career in TV, or for example, artist filmmakers, or projects where there's a cast attached, or the writer-director wants to work in a grander scale. So requiring a budget that's more than 3.5 million. They will also apply for impact. The core priorities also come into play in assessing all the projects for impact. So in terms of budget, just to say that, so for the second features is from 1 million to about 15 million. For the debut, so the first, it has to be from 3.5 million to 15 million. And in terms of amounts, impact will go up to 1.25 million, and discovery, the maximum is 1 million. Bearing in mind that we seldom award the maximum awards, so the range is roughly 500,000 to 850,000. I also wanted to say that in terms of numbers, in the development and the production financing are completely separate. So there's an application to development, and then there's an application to production. In terms of numbers in development, roughly, we're talking about 60 to 70 projects per year in development. When we move to production, if you look at the numbers, there are 5 projects financed impact and roughly 6 projects in discovery. So that's about 11. So the numbers actually don't add up. So it just means that because we've developed a project, it doesn't necessarily mean that we then are going to provide production financing. And there are also projects that we haven't developed that will apply for production financing. So it's just to make clear that those are 2 separate funds and they are assessed in 2 separate processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Amma. Next slide, please. So we do support other forms, and so we've just coming to the end of our immersive pilot for XR/VR, and actually everything we've supported has been really quite considerable in terms of cultural impact. Made a real big impact on the festival circuit. So we had IDFA Venice wins Best XR prize this year for Consensus Gentium, which is an app-based film, which is written and directed by Karen Palmer. And that's currently closed. So we're just assessing both the short form animation fund and the immersive. We're just doing an evaluation, and then we're going to refresh our offer later this year for those who are interested in other forms. And then high budget shorts, we had, so Future Takes is a new partnership with, interested to know if anybody here applied, because we're just in the middle of the whittling down assessment. We had team, how many did we have? 450 applications, was that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
For 7 slots of up to £90,000 each. So it's a partnership between us and Film 4. And the aim is to do that at least once a year. And so that's a commitment to make sure that that was such a space that felt really like it needed to be filled fast. The bridge between shorts and features, and moving on from the lower budget short form to a bigger canvas. Next slide, please. So again, network is incredibly important part of the Filmmaking Fund family. And actually, perhaps you might, Tom, want to do a separate session actually with network, because they're doing incredible work and they've changed quite a lot recently. They actually had their launch last night, but there are some new funds coming that are, which I'll speak to just shortly. So I think I would really advocate for that actually, because there's a lot of opportunities there. So that's again 7.8 million for short film funding, feature treatment funding for live action animation or immersive projects. It's very much a UK wide network. So there's delivery through the nations and the regions. And it's also about professional development opportunities for writers, directors and producers across the country. And they will launch their treatment fund later this year. And that's really important to note that. So that's very much for new and emerging. And that doesn't necessarily mean new, but when we say new, it doesn't necessarily mean young. So new, no producer is required for that funding. They are just, again, scoping out the guidelines, and then they're going to be launching that later this year. And I think we've got a resource for that as well, have we not, James, to drop in the chat? But I think we probably should set up a separate session on that. And they'll also have script labs coming soon too across England. The nations do their own offer, but across England, they'll that will launch imminently too, and that's a big emphasis again on writers. So I just thought I'd lift those 2 points up. And also the cap for those interested in shorts, the budget cap has gone up from 15 to 25 in recognition of how much harder it is to make anything on a budget at the moment, and particularly to stop writers, directors and producers above line talent not being paid, which often is not something we ever advocate, but often what happens is people go, need more money, can't raise it, and then throw their own fee in, and that cap change is to stop that as much as possible, unless of course you it's something that you volunteer, but we would not support that unless you really insist. Next slide, please. So I talked about our documentary delegation. So just to lift up films such as Is There Anybody Out There? Ella Glendenning, actually, as a writer, has got something in development with us, and she directed this incredible documentary based on her own experience, and that premiered at Sundance and will come out later this year. And then Cherish Ikuteka's BAFTA-winning Black Cop, two of the notables of many, actually. Again, they've had a real incredible run of great work and very diverse work that they've supported, and I'm sure they will continue to do so. Next slide, please. So this is how it all breaks down, just so you can see it in one place. So the Creative Challenge Fund, just to reiterate, that is for the funding, and it is going to production companies or other screen organisations. So you will not be able to apply to us for those labs and programmes. You will apply at multiple points across the year to the people running the funds, to running the labs. So just to be clear, so we'll give the funding for the labs, and then other people will run them, and we'll make sure there's a spread, and we'll make sure there's a really good offering for new and emerging, for documentary and fiction, that there will be a blend, that as much as is covered, and we'll do call outs twice a year. So the point being that it's nearly £1 million towards labs and development programs, and the idea is also that some of those will have seed funding, and so that will be another way to access some kind of early startup development funding for projects. So that's how it all breaks down. Next slide, please. And then, yes, centering again the strong commitment to access inclusion. We have a production inclusion manager who sits in our team and is across the decision-making process. Her name is Morgana Melvin. You'll see a picture of her shortly, in the whole team. And so she sits specifically across production and runs Step Up, which is to step up underrepresented crew members, and wellbeing support. So that's putting a big onus on ensuring that there is someone who is not the producer on set, who is a dedicated professional, who covers both HR challenges and issues, but as well as bullying and harassment and anything else that may that anybody who is part of that production process can report and can get the support. And then a commitment to access support, so making sure that reasonable adjustments and access are again centered and supported financially. And so that's again centering a commitment to meaningful and genuine support for upskilling, mentoring and production shadowing. So we're going to do we're going to launch that later this year to emphasize again opportunities for new and emerging people to get support and experience on other projects, not their own, in order that they can just see how the process works. And everything is required to meet the new diversity standards and be subject to the new inclusion targets. And then we'll pay on the new Future Takes scheme for access coordinators, wellbeing facilitators and mentors. and then supporting our team to train in best practice in anti-racism practice and trans inclusion across the piece, so that we as a team are completely up to date in terms of serving everyone in the constituency. So these are our new inclusion targets. On the left, there are different this is BFI wide. So there are different commitments to Black and global majority representation in London and outside, and that's it, as I said, across the whole of all of BFI programs, not just us. And there's a new inclusion target for working class background for socioeconomic, and then a commitment for teams based outside of London and the Southeast, and then productions based outside of London and the Southeast, because they're not necessarily obviously the same thing. And that's, I think, and then just to center the inclusion targets and how we're actually doing. So you can see that that's across the last year. So actually in the last year, our stats on production have gone up from 17%, 21, 22 in terms of Black and global majority writers, directors, producers, to 35%. And in development 39, you can see that we're above the targets, except in terms of the disability representation. And again, we would like a lab and do separate commitment to tackling that. And I think that's probably it. So we should go to committee members. Shall we actually touch on this, Tom? Sorry, actually we should do the changes to the application process. So let's just quickly touch on that. Sorry, James, can you just go back to that? James, do you want to just speak to this actually, because you're the one who is actually the first port of call in terms of process?
Yeah, sure. So basically we tried to sort of streamline this whole process and make the whole process a bit more transparent for applicants. You know, that it can sort of come across as a bit, behind closed doors, quite nebulous. So we've put a lot of this in the guidelines for both development and for discovery and impact funding. But this is just giving you a very quick overview of the kind of timelines, how we've changed sort of like access to the funding. So we now accept video responses. So you can sort of do your creative pitch as a video if you prefer not to do text. That sort of makes more sense for the piece of work that you're working on. But yeah, we've kind of put all this into the guidelines, but we just wanted it to be a bit more transparent, so you know how we assess. There's 2 executives across everything. We've widened our script reader pool so that there's a lot more sort of representation if we're looking at sort of projects which have specific demographics they're speaking to. So we like to see that we have someone across the assessment process who hopefully shares your experience and can sort of speak to that and kind of assess with that in mind. So we basically sort of try to expand on that as much as possible and make it as transparent and accessible as possible. But I know we have to wrap up for questions, so I'll stop talking now.
Let's just show our team slide and then we'll end there and then we'll come out of this. So this is the Filmmaking Fund team. So obviously Lizzie Frankie, Fiona Moram and Natasha Wharton are, as you'll have seen in the announcements, they're our senior execs who've been in post for and had an incredible careers, and they are leaving our shores for new ones soon. So this is the new look team. So this is obviously without them. And then for production, we actually do widen out our pool. So we actually have people from Audience Fund and from other departments in the BFI, in order that we have a full range of lived experience around the table. That's incredibly important to us. And so let's come out of this and then let's tackle some of your specific questions.
Thank you very much, Mia and team. I'm conscious that the questions have been flooding in. Rest assured, Kate at the Guild office is taking note of all the questions. If there are any that we think are not covered either in the conversation or presentation or in the guidelines that James has linked to, and I do recommend that you all go through them because there's a lot of detail there, and I think you might find that the majority of your queries are addressed there. If there are any that I think need follow up, Mia and her team have kindly agreed to look at them separately, and then we will issue responses in whatever way sees fit, possibly in the newsletter at the end of this week or next week. Thank you for that, Mia. It's very clear to me. What I'm hearing is Development Fund is broadly probably for the more established writer, but Creative Challenge Fund and BFI Network will have a lot of opportunities for newer writers to meet producers, to develop their material and their skills. And we look forward to hearing more information on both of those in due course. I think a session with the network is a really good idea, Mia, and I will follow up on that. We've got questions lined up from 3 committee members, which I think will cover 3 discrete areas. So I'm going to jump straight into them, please. Olivia, if you could unmute yourself and just, I'll hand you the floor for a second.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks very much, Mia, and everyone for that very good and succinct presentation. I really like to address, I think perhaps Louise and Amma on this, which is because development has, traditionally been such a, if not hell, a swamp, and so many projects get lost in that process. I wonder what you feel is the best path to be guiding writers on in order to get from the treatment stage or the early stages of their project to something that can go to the production fund and have some possibility at least of success. What you think you're bringing to it that's new or that's old or that's different, that will help people, writers particularly, to get there.
Amma, I'll start, and I obviously just jump in as soon as you would like to. I mean, we work quite differently. It's just sort of worth restating at the top that sort of we work quite differently than a fund like BBC Film or Film 4 who commission. We don't commission, so it's we're trying to sort of have as level a playing field as we can by having that kind of application process laid out as it is. So it's not, just so you know, it's not a case of us kind of going, oh, we're really keen to get a comedy, or we're really keen, we're really looking to develop more musicals, or we're sort of completely genre agnostic. It is always about the priorities. I mean, I guess in terms of sort of moving your application forward, it is just about it's really the strength of the project and how strongly the project and your team, you, the producer, the director, if you have them at that point in development, speak to our priorities and kind of engage with them in that way. Yeah, that's sort of, I don't know, Amma, is that accurate?
Well, I think within what is possible in our remit, we accompany all the projects that we support in development, providing feedback on versions, etc. But in terms of projects getting to production, if I speak as a producer, someone who's produced before, there's no kind of magic formula. I think there's an element of risk actually in development overall. And I think outside of the BFI and for all producers, they're working on countless projects, and many of them will never see the light of day. And there are many directors and writers who would have written countless scripts, which for reasons which I think are outside of our remit, don't get produced. But what we're there to do is to create a scenario to make it more possible actually for the projects to be developed, and also providing funding. So writing, writers who are being paid to actually test ideas that could potentially be produced. They're not writing on spec because from lived experience, there are a lot of producers, for example, who will engage a writer and not pay them to test. And what the BFI is able to do is to provide financing to at least make it less of a risky endeavor. So you're actually paid to test ideas which could potentially be produced. And then there's a possibility that we might produce them, but we also provide enough guidance that there are other financial entities or other partners who could produce the projects that we develop. So in a way, we're there to kind of smooth some of the more fragile elements of developing in film production as a whole.
Great. I mean, I think that's just to very quickly come back on that. It's really important to emphasize the fragility of that early process and how difficult that is. That's where there is no commercial support there. And for writers, they're always being asked to take all the risk at that stage with no recognition of the financial and personal cost of that. So it's great to hear that the BFI recognizes that stage of the very difficult stage of development. Thank you.
And Olivia, just to add on to that, what Emma was saying, it's just also worth noting that we're aware it's a risk for writers' development it's the riskiest part of the arena in lots of ways. But that is also why we have, tried to pay producer fees so that you can have a kind of team. We have space in our development budgets for script editors, if that is something that people want to work with and feel would be useful for them in their process, to have that extra level of support. Obviously, we're a relatively small team, so while we are contributing and having those creative conversations, we can't be as deep into it as a script editor would be. But that's why we sort of try to make sure if that is something that the writer and the producer think is helpful for the project, that is factored in and something we can pay for.
Thank you both, and thanks, Olivia. Could I ask Suki to unmute and pose your question, please?
Thanks. I'm unmuted. This has a short preface. First thing is to say, as a disabled trans queer filmmaker and also manager of the Trans on Screenwriters Lab, my response is very, very positive to these new directions. Thank you for such a full and, again, as we said, succinct presentation of a great deal. My questions may sound a slight producer question. It's not. It's about maintaining the creative integrity of a project. And my question is, I'll get my wording exactly right. Is it still BFI policy that small indie creative teams are encouraged or indeed obliged to get under the wing of preferred supplier production companies if they're going to be successful in their application for development funding? How small a team will you deal with directly?
No, we don't. We definitely don't have preferred suppliers, so we definitely want to break that. Any perception. I mean, there definitely is no list. So you just have to have a production company to apply, but it's relatively easy to set up a production company, and you just need a limited company, and the reason for that is just that because of our capacity and because we fund as much as we can, we just need someone to shepherd that project and to deliver it. But I'll leave it to James. Do you want to perhaps elaborate, or Louise, you'll just come off mute. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah,
point?
Thanks, Mia. I was just quickly going to add that we actually, in terms of the production fund, particularly in Discovery, we also do have, there is now a rule that if you are the same producer applying for funding within 18 months and you say we awarded you funding last year and you apply again, you have to show in your application how you are engaging with the step-up programs, with kind of education, with, if you're a more established producer, we cannot simply keep awarding the same people money for their projects without them sort of paying it forward. So actually, yeah, we're completely open to small production companies. There is no gold star list of approved people. Just got to make that super clear.
Thank you. That's extremely good to hear. That's all we wanted to know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suki.
Thanks, Suki. Kim, can I ask you to unmute and show yourself? I can't see you. You have a question for the panel.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for that. Hi, Mia and team. Thank you for being here. My question, what can you tell us about how the executives evaluate material in general, but also when it is outside their own cultural experience or dealing with a protected characteristic, which may be unfamiliar to the development team?
So I think probably James and I can speak to this a bit, Amma as well, of course. We have just refreshed our readers pool, which was quite a sort of extensive process. James, I don't know if you want to talk about the readers pool a little bit, just you were sort of slightly more...
Absolutely. So we definitely sort of recognize that as a concern, and as a team we only represent, you know, so many demographics, and of course intersectionality plays into a huge part of that as well, and we can't possibly represent every experience. So what we try to do is expand our reader pool, and readers are really important to our assessment making process. Everything that comes in as a full script will be read, be it development, discovery or impact, and that pool we've expanded to cover all regions and nations of the UK, to try and cover as much kind of representation in terms of background, socioeconomic background, kind of protected characteristics, all that kind of thing. So we've tried to sort of encompass as many sort of perspectives and viewpoints as possible. It should be said as well that in that application process, at least 3 people, including that script reader, will be across any application that we get in. So we'll have at least 3 perspectives on that piece of work. So we sort of hope we can sort of speak to that kind of concern in that kind of way. That's helpful.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. I would like to go for some quick fire questions from members. This is a sort of a synthesis of I have to say, dozens of great questions that I've been sent from members over the past few days. The sort of rapid fire round. So anybody jump in. I guess the advice is, where should this writer go across the BFI organisation? So say there is a Writers Guild member who's a playwright or an author who wants to adapt their work into a screenplay but doesn't have much experience with or contacts in the film industry. Where does that writer start?
With a producer.
Rapid fire.
With a producer, I mean, have to find a producer who wants to champion that project, and an application can be made to the BFI. And
where does one find a producer these days, Emma?
I think actually, you know, watch the films that you like and see who produced them. I think that's actually an interesting way. Festivals, which producers tend to be at festivals. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, sorry, Mia's battery just died. She is jumping back on. She has texted me. But just to say, yeah, I know that Network are kind of fund quite a lot of like networking opportunities, because yeah, I think it has been an issue for writers and producers to get matched up. We as the kind of the feature fund simply don't have capacity to run all of those schemes, but I think something maybe like the Creative Challenge Fund, someone might well come in with a pilot of an idea for something that they want to kind of work out how to matchmake writers, directors, producers together. And yeah, it's definitely something we're aware of as a bit of a deficit in the industry. It's kind of hard to do. But yeah, we run as many networking things as we can. And yeah, it's just about like engaging with short form material. That can be a good way to find emerging producers who will be open to working with new writers.
And the second thing is that I think everyone is looking for a good idea. I think sometimes it's also to where does the power lay? The power lays in the person who writes and has the good ideas. So across the board, the producers are looking for good writers, and probably need the writers more than the writers need the producers. And I think there are a lot of agents as well who are matching writers to directors. So it's also getting in touch with agents who are looking for material, trying to meet, because it could also come from the directors as well. Some of the directors might meet a writer and then take that writer to a producer. So I do think that there are quite a lot of ways in the difficult context, lots of ways also just to find a way to get a good project out.
Thank you. Just for the avoidance of doubt, and James, the writer cannot also be the applying producer, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. What about a writer returning to the industry after a career or family break, feeling like their voices aren't welcome or valued anymore? What advice would you give to that writer?
You're absolutely welcome with us.
Absolutely. It's something we do track as well, returnships and people coming back to the industry after a considerable break. We definitely do consider, and we try to sort of prioritize.
Thank you very much. What about a writer of commercial or genre material? Are they also welcome, James?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Obviously, I mean, as Louise said before, we don't kind of stipulate we're looking for a comedy this year, we're looking for a horror this year. It's all about voice, it's all about perspective, it's all about something that feels interesting, unique, whatever you may write. And I think, yeah, absolutely everyone's welcome.
I think there is something on your guidelines about supporting projects that wouldn't sort of be able to support themselves purely commercially. Is there some wording there?
Yeah,
that is correct.
Yeah, sorry, James, just to jump in a bit, but yeah, that is true. And I think we're always trying to kind of fill a gap where projects won't necessarily have access to commercial funding, even if it is a really commercial idea. And actually, I think something like Rye Lane is an example of that. You know, it's a really commercial idea, it's a rom-com, but commercial markets often won't take a risk as they perceive it on a film with 2 black leads. That is the place where we can come in and provide funding and sort of fill that risk gap. So it's not about when we're sort of looking for things that wouldn't get made easily elsewhere. It's not because we're looking for something with no audience. We're just looking for things that, you know, where the commercial market is often a lot more conservative, and we're able to take those risks as the market perceives it.
Understood. Thank you. Quite a lot of it's consternation in the chat about the lack of overlap between writers and producers, which I imagine therefore will be a helpful message that's been communicated today. I'm aware that Mia sort of went on her listening tour around the UK and that fed into the development of the new design of these funds. What do you think you heard most clearly about the experience of writers across the UK working in the independent film sector primarily, and how do you wake up every morning trying to address those concerns?
I mean, it's a tricky one. It's quite nebulous in terms of what was heard. I think there was an attitude that the BFI is potentially quite a closed door. There's quite a lot of smoke and mirrors. And I think a huge part of what we took from that is being as transparent and fair as possible, and that we try to sort of, you know, put that first and foremost in our guidelines and in this kind of new iteration of the strategy and the new iteration of this filmmaking fund team. And we are all about parity with everybody. We want everyone from, you know, people who are making their first start in the industry, to people returning to the industry, to people who are more established, who have something kind of risky and creative and interesting to say. So it was really about kind of trying to open our doors a little bit more and kind of give people a view of, you know, behind the curtain, kind of, you know, how it all works, and to kind of emphasize that we do really care about transparency, about fairness, about equality amongst all creatives, all writers who kind of want to approach us for funding.
Thank you, James. That's a very honest and helpful answer. I have an image of the BFI in The Wizard of Oz, sort of behind the curtain with all sorts of levers and things. I do recall that the early slide said that filmmaking is about connecting people and understanding them, and an endeavor like this, an event like this, I hope has worked really well in both directions. We are grateful for your time. We're grateful for your insights. Once again, to members, we will take a record of all these questions and go through them and do our best to address them. And BFI team, I'll be in touch with follow-ups both within the film committee and also BFI network, and let's build on this. And yeah, we're always here if you want to find out what writers are thinking in the coming months.